The wipers could not keep up with the rain. Mia Carter gripped the wheel with both hands, knuckles pale under the dashboard light. The road ahead nothing but a smear of gray and headlights bouncing off water. She had left the house with nothing but her phone, her car keys, and the sound of Victor's voice still ringing in her ears, sharp and cold, telling her that this was his house, his rules, and that her mother was too busy running a company to notice how her daughter was being raised. She had not packed a bag. She had not said goodbye. She had simply walked out the front door into a storm that did not care how young she was or how far she had to go. The car shuddered. A sound like a gunshot cracked from the back right tire, and the wheel jerked hard in her hands. The car swerved across the wet road, tires screaming against the asphalt, and for 3 long seconds Mia was certain she was about to die on a road she did not even know the name of. She fought the wheel. She did not scream, though her throat wanted to. She pulled the car onto the gravel shoulder and stopped, hands shaking, breath coming in short, useless gasps. Behind her, headlights swung wide around the curve. A truck horn blasted long and furious as the vehicle clipped past her, missing her back bumper by less than a foot, spraying her windshield with muddy water. The driver did not slow down. Taillights vanished into the rain like they had never been there at all. Mia sat frozen, hands still locked on the wheel, rain hammering the roof of the car like something trying to get in. She looked at her phone. 6% battery. No signal bars at all, just a small gray circle with a line through it, mocking her. She had no choice. She got out into the storm. The flat tire was shredded down to the rim, black rubber peeling away like burnt skin. Mia stood over it in sandals that were never meant for gravel, rain soaking through her thin jacket within seconds, and she did the only thing her body seemed to know how to do anymore. She cried. Not loud, not the kind of crying people make when someone is watching. The quiet kind, the kind that comes out sideways, shoulders shaking, while a person tries to hold themselves together using nothing but stubbornness. A pair of headlights appeared down the road, moving slow. Mia's stomach dropped. She thought of the black car that had been parked across from her school 3 days in a row. She thought of Victor's voice on the phone telling someone, not her, that he would handle it, that nothing leaves this family without his permission. She stepped back from the road, half hidden behind her own open car door, heart slamming against her ribs. The vehicle slowed further. Not a black car. A tow truck, faded blue paint. A magnetic sign on the door that read Hartley Auto Repair, the letters chipped at the edges from years of weather. The truck pulled onto the shoulder behind her, hazard lights blinking orange across the wet road. A man climbed out, broad-shouldered, a canvas jacket already soaked through, and he did not approach fast. He approached the way a person approaches something easily frightened, hands visible, voice pitched low under the rain. "Hey there! You good?" Mia did not answer right away. She could not seem to make her mouth work. "I'm not going to hurt you," the man said. "Name's Daniel. I own the shop a few miles back. Saw your flashers from the road. You want me to call somebody, or you want me to just fix the tire?" Something about the plainness of the offer, fix the tire or call somebody, like those were the only 2 problems in the world, cracked something loose in Mia's chest. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and nodded toward the wreck of rubber on her back wheel. "I don't have anyone to call," she said. "My phone's basically dead." Daniel looked at her for a second too long, the kind of look that was not suspicious, just careful, the way a person studies a wound before deciding how bad it is. "All right," he said. "Let's get you off this shoulder before somebody else clips you." He worked fast and said little, jacking the car, breaking the lug nuts loose with practiced motions that did not need thinking. Mia stood close to the open passenger door, arms wrapped around herself, watching the rain slide off the brim of his cap. "You don't have to stay out here," Daniel said without looking up. "Get in the cab of my truck if you want, heater's running." "I'm fine." "You're shaking." I said I'm fine. He did not push it again. He simply worked, and somewhere in the silence between the clinking of tools and the rain on metal, Mia felt the panic in her chest start to loosen, just slightly, just enough to breathe. "You got somewhere safe to be tonight?" Daniel asked, pulling the spare tire from her trunk. The question landed harder than he probably meant it to. Mia opened her mouth to say yes, of course, automatic, the kind of answer she had given 100 times to 100 adults who did not actually want to know the real answer. What came out instead was silence. Daniel glanced up at her just once and did not ask again. He finished tightening the lug nuts, lowered the jack, and stood, wiping his hands on a rag that was more grease than cloth at this point. "This spare's not built for highway speed," he said. "Get it to a shop tomorrow. Get a real tire on it. You're maybe 15 minutes from town now." "Thank you," Mia said, and her voice cracked on the second word. "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing. I have to pay you something." "You don't." Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, water already curling the edges. "Shop number's on there. Landline still works even when cell towers don't, which out here is most of the time. You need anything at all, you call that number." Mia took the card with fingers that would not stop trembling. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You don't even know me." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, rain running down the lines of a face that had seen more than 30-something years, usually carves into a person. "Because somebody helped me once when I had nowhere to go," he said. "Wasn't going to leave a kid crying on the side of the road in a storm. Now get home safe." He climbed back into his truck without waiting for a thank you he clearly did not need, and pulled away, taillights shrinking into the rain. Mia stood alone on the shoulder for a moment longer, the card pressed flat against her palm, and for the first time in hours, she did not feel like she was drowning. She got back into her car. She tried her mother's cell phone, the call going straight to a voicemail greeting too polished and too rehearsed to belong to someone who actually answered her phone anymore. She tried again, same result. She left a message this time, voice shaking, telling her mother she was okay, that her tire had blown out, that a stranger had stopped to help her, that she needed to talk to her about Victor as soon as possible. She did not mention the black car that had been outside her school. She pulled back onto the road, driving slower now, more careful, the spare tire thumping faintly beneath her with every rotation. The rain had not let up. Neither had the tight, low hum of dread sitting behind her ribs. It was the headlights in her mirror that made her stomach turn cold again. They had appeared somewhere after the second turn, far enough back that she told herself it was nothing. Just another driver heading the same direction on the only road that connected anything out here. She told herself that twice, 3 times. But the headlights matched her speed exactly. When she slowed, they slowed. When she sped up, just slightly, just to test it, they closed the distance instead of falling behind. Mia's hands tightened on the wheel again, the same wheel that 30 minutes earlier had nearly spun her into a ditch. She was not imagining it. Someone was following her. She thought about pulling over, about letting the other car pass so she could see who it was, but every instinct in her body told her that would be the worst thing she could do. So she kept driving, eyes flicking between the road and the mirror, the spare tire thumping a nervous rhythm beneath her. A turnoff appeared on her right, a narrow gravel lane half hidden by overgrown brush, the kind of road a person would only know about if they had grown up around here. Mia had grown up around here. She had spent 2 summers at a camp down that exact lane before Victor decided summer camps were a waste of money, better spent on things that mattered to him. She killed her headlights and turned hard, gravel spraying under her tires, and ducked the car behind a wall of trees just off the lane. For a moment, nothing happened. Rain drummed on the roof. Her own breathing sounded too loud in the silence. Then the other car passed on the main road, slow, deliberate, a dark sedan with tinted windows that caught no light at all. It rolled past the turnoff without stopping, taillights glowing red for a long second, before the road curved and swallowed them whole. Mia did not move for almost a full minute. She counted her own heartbeat instead, something a counselor had once taught her to do, though she had never once needed it the way she needed it now. When she finally pulled back onto the main road, headlights on again, hands aching from how hard she had been gripping the wheel, she did not turn toward home. She turned back the way she had come, toward the chipped blue letters on a tow truck door, toward the only number she had that did not belong to her mother's office or her stepfather's lawyers. Toward Hartley Auto Repair. The shop sign was dark when she pulled into the lot, the bay doors closed, only a single light burning in a small office window at the back. Mia sat in her car for a moment, hands still trembling, before she made herself get out and knock. It was Daniel who answered, still in the same soaked jacket, a little girl peeking around his leg with wide, curious eyes, and a stuffed rabbit missing one ear. "You're back," he said, and there was no judgment in it, just a quiet kind of attention, the look of a man recalculating a situation. "Someone followed me," Mia said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. A car. It followed me from where you fixed my tire, and I hid on the camp road, and I don't know who it was, and I didn't know where else to go. Daniel did not ask a dozen questions. He stepped back and held the door open. Get inside, he said. Lily, go grab the blanket off the couch. The little girl darted off without a word, Rabbit dragging along the floor behind her. The office smelled like coffee and oil and old paper, a small space crowded with invoices and a calendar 3 months out of date. Mia sat where Daniel pointed, on a metal folding chair beside a space heater, and tried to make her hands stop shaking by wrapping them around the mug of hot water he handed her. Since there was no tea in a mechanic's shop, only instant coffee that smelled faintly of motor parts. Tell me what you saw, Daniel said, sitting across from her, elbows on his knees, voice low and even. She told him, the dark sedan, the tinted windows, the way it had matched her speed exactly, slowed when she slowed, closed distance when she sped up. You think it has something to do with your family? Daniel asked. Mia hesitated, and that hesitation said more than any answer could have. My stepfather doesn't like that I'm not where he can see me, she said finally. He's had people watch the house before. Watch me at school. He says it's for my safety. It doesn't feel like safety. Daniel's jaw tightened, just slightly, a small movement Mia almost missed. You got somebody you can call? Your mom? I tried. She didn't pick up. She never picks up. Lily reappeared with a folded blanket nearly as big as she was, dragging it across the floor and dropping it into Mia's lap with the seriousness of a much older child completing an important task. It has dinosaurs on it, Lily announced, but it's still warm. Despite everything, Mia laughed, a small broken sound, and pulled the blanket around her shoulders. Thank you, she said. Daniel stood and crossed to an old corded phone mounted on the wall, the kind that had not changed in 20 years, and dialed a number from memory. Patrick, it's Daniel Hartley out at the shop on Route 9. I've got a 16-year-old here who says she was followed by a vehicle, possibly connected to a domestic situation. No, she's not hurt. I just want somebody to log it, and maybe swing a car past the property tonight. He spoke for another minute, calm and clear, the kind of voice that made complicated things sound manageable, and when he hung up he turned back to Mia. Officer's going to come take a report. Until then, you're staying right here, under good light, with people who know you exist. Nobody's getting past me to bother you tonight. Mia did not know this man. She had known him for less than 2 hours total, and yet something about the steadiness in his voice made her believe him completely. The officer arrived 20 minutes later, a heavy-set man named Patrick Doyle, who shook the rain off his hat at the door and greeted Daniel by first name, the easy familiarity of two people who had grown up in the same small town and never quite left it. He took a seat across from Mia, notebook open on his knee, and asked his questions gently, without any of the sharp suspicion she had braced herself for. Tell me about the car, he said. Anything you remember. Make, color, plate, anything at all. Dark sedan. Maybe black, maybe dark blue. It was hard to tell in the rain. Tinted windows. I couldn't see the driver. I didn't get the plate. And you think this might connect to your stepfather? Mia's hands tightened around the mug of water gone cold in her lap. He's had people watch me before, she said quietly. Not like this, not following me on a dark road, but there's been a car outside my school. He says it's protection. He says a lot of things are protection. Patrick wrote without looking up, his pen steady and unhurried. Your stepfather have a name? Victor Sloan. The pen paused for half a second, so brief that Mia almost did not notice it, before continuing across the page. I know that name, Patrick said carefully. Owns a fair piece of property around the county, donates to a few things. That kind of name tends to come with a few too many friends in places that make this sort of report complicated. I'm not telling you that to scare you. I'm telling you because I want you to understand I'm going to log this properly, and it might take more than one phone call before anybody takes it as seriously as it deserves. So nothing happens, Mia said, and the flatness in her voice was worse than anger would have been. I didn't say that. Patrick closed his notebook. I said it takes more than one phone call. I'm making the first one tonight. There'll be a patrol car past this shop and past your mother's residence for the next several nights. That's not nothing. When he left, the office felt smaller without him in it. the quiet pressing back down around Mia like water closing over her head. Lily had fallen asleep on the small couch in the corner, the dinosaur blanket abandoned in favor of an old plaid one Daniel must have kept around for exactly these long nights. And Daniel sat nearby, refilling Mia's mug without asking if she wanted more. "You don't have to keep doing this," Mia said, staying up, watching out for me. "You already fixed my tire. You didn't sign up for the rest of it." Daniel looked at his daughter sleeping on the couch for a long moment before he answered. "My wife died when Lily was 3, he said. "Aneurysm, no warning, gone before I even got to the hospital. For about a year after that, I didn't think I was going to make it as a father. There were nights I didn't know how I was going to get through till morning. And there were people, strangers mostly, who got me there anyway. Brought food, sat with me when I didn't ask them to, didn't make me explain myself." He shrugged, a small, tired movement. "I figure I owe that forward to whoever needs it next. Tonight, that's you." Mia did not trust herself to speak. She nodded instead, and pulled the dinosaur blanket tighter around her shoulders, and for the first time since she had walked out of Victor's house into the storm, she let herself believe that maybe she was actually going to be all right. She did not know, sitting in that small, cluttered office with a sleeping 8-year-old on the couch beside her, that 200 miles away her mother was standing in front of a glass wall on the 40th floor of a building that bore her own name, fighting a different kind of battle entirely, one that was about to end the moment a single voicemail finally reached her. Helen Carter had not looked at her personal phone in 6 hours. The acquisition meeting had run long, the way these things always did when 2 boards of directors disagreed about numbers that mattered more to them than they did to anyone who actually had to live with the consequences. Helen sat at the head of a long table, posture perfect, voice never rising, dismantling every objection raised against her company's offer, with the patience of someone who had learned long ago that anger was a luxury she could not afford, in a room full of men waiting for her to lose her composure. "The valuation stands," she said, for the 3rd time that hour. "If your board wants a different number, they're welcome to find a different buyer." Across the table, a man named Gerald Lowry, representing the opposing firm, smiled the thin smile of someone used to winning. He would not win today. Helen had built Carter Holdings from a single failing textile company into something that controlled supply chains across 4 continents, and she had not done that by blinking first. Her assistant, Grace Bellamy, slipped a folded note in front of her sometime past 9 in the evening. Helen read it without breaking stride in her sentence, finished her point, and only then allowed herself a single glance at the words written there. "Personal voicemail, marked urgent, from Mia." Something in Helen's chest tightened, the way it always did at the mention of her daughter's name during work hours. A small private guilt she had learned to fold up small enough to carry without anyone noticing. "We'll reconvene at 9 tomorrow morning," she said, standing, the meeting ending the moment she decided it would end. "Gerald, have your board review the terms tonight. I expect an answer by 10. She did not wait for a response. She was already walking, heels silent on thick carpet, phone in hand, scrolling to the voicemail before she had even reached the elevator. The message played in her ear as the doors closed. "Mom, it's me. I'm okay. I just want you to know I'm okay. My tire blew out on Route 9 and a man stopped to help me. His name's Daniel. He owns a repair shop. He didn't even charge me anything. I tried calling you like 4 times. I really need to talk to you about Victor. Please call me back. Please." The elevator reached the lobby. Helen did not move. She played the message again, then a 3rd time, listening for the small catches in her daughter's voice that she had been too distracted to hear the first time, the way the sentence about Victor had been rushed, almost swallowed, like Mia had been afraid to say it at all. Grace appeared at her side, tablet in hand, already reciting the next item on a schedule that did not care what had just happened. "Tomorrow's flight to the coast leaves at 7. We have the press call at 8, regarding the Lowry deal, and your dinner with the board is confirmed for—" "Cancel it," Helen said. "All of it." Grace blinked. In 11 years working for Helen Carter, she had never once heard those 2 words used together. "The acquisition meeting tomorrow is the entire reason the board flew in from." "I said cancel it, Grace." Helen's voice did not rise, but something underneath it had changed, gone hard and immediate in a way that ended the conversation. "Get the plane ready, not the coast flight. I need to get to Route 9, wherever that is, tonight." "Tonight?" "Helen, it's nearly 10 o'clock, and the board—" "My daughter left me 4 voicemails because she was scared, and I was in a meeting about fabric margins. Helen's hand tightened around the phone until her knuckles went pale. I will deal with the board. Get me a plane. She called the number Mia had left, a landline with an area code she did not recognize, and a man's voice answered on the second ring. Calm, unhurried, the kind of voice that had clearly answered late-night calls before. Hartley Auto. This is Helen Carter. I believe my daughter Mia is with you. There was a brief pause, the sound of a hand covering a receiver, a murmur of voices too low to make out. She's here, Daniel said when he came back. She's safe. We had a car follow her earlier tonight, so I called it in. Officer should be here any minute to take a report. Helen's stomach dropped through the floor. Followed her? Followed her where? By whom? She thinks it might be connected to her stepfather. That's about all I know. She's pretty shaken up, but she's not hurt, and she's not alone. I've got my daughter here too. We're not going anywhere. Something about the plainness of his voice, the total absence of drama in it, was the only thing keeping Helen upright in that moment. I'm coming, she said. Tonight, however long it takes. Take your time getting here safe, Daniel said. She's not in any danger sitting in my office. You don't need to break any speed records. Helen almost laughed, a short, startled sound with no humor in it at all. Nobody spoke to her like that anymore, like a person instead of a calendar to be managed. Thank you, she said, and meant it more than she had meant anything in a long time. Please, just keep her safe until I get there. That's already happening, Daniel said. Drive careful. The line went quiet. Helen stood in the lobby of a building with her name on it, holding a phone that suddenly felt like the only important object in the world, and for the first time in longer than she wanted to admit, she did not think about the acquisition, or the board, or the press call. She thought about a stranger's voice telling her not to hurry, and how strange it was that those words made her want to run. The flight took just over 2 hours, though it felt to Helen like a great deal longer, every minute stretched thin by the silence of the private cabin and the absence of any new information. She had tried calling the shop twice more, just to hear that her daughter was still there, still safe, still breathing the same air as a stranger who had decided, for no reason she could understand, to take a 16-year-old's fear seriously when nobody else in Mia's life seemed willing to. A car was waiting when she landed, arranged by Grace despite the late hour, despite the cancellations, despite 11 years of being asked to do impossible things on no notice. Helen sat in the back seat with her coat still buttoned, watching dark fields blur past the window, replaying the voicemail one more time in her mind even though she no longer needed to play it aloud to hear every word. Route 9 appeared as a narrow 2-lane road, lined with trees still dripping from the storm that had passed through hours earlier. The shop came into view slowly, a low building with a faded sign, 2 bay doors, and a scattering of lights. More lights than Helen had expected for this hour, including the unmistakable flash of red and blue parked near the entrance. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Stop the car," she said, already reaching for the door handle before the vehicle had fully come to rest. She crossed the gravel lot at a near run, heels sinking into wet stone, and the shop door opened before she reached it, light spilling out into the dark. Officer Doyle stood just inside, notebook tucked under one arm, and behind him, wrapped in a blanket covered in cartoon dinosaurs, sat Mia, pale and tired but whole, blinking up at the sudden noise of her mother's arrival. "Mom!" Helen did not remember crossing the rest of the distance. She only remembered her arms closing around her daughter, the wet wool of her coat pressed against Mia's shoulder, and the way her own breath came out in something close to a sob, a sound she had not allowed herself to make in front of anyone in years. "I'm sorry," Helen said, into Mia's hair, over and over, the words coming out smaller each time, less like an apology and more like a confession. "I'm so sorry. I should have answered. I should have been there." "You're here now," Mia said, and that, somehow, was worse. The easy forgiveness in her daughter's voice, landing like a blow Helen had not braced for. Officer Doyle cleared his throat gently, giving them a moment before stepping forward to summarize the report. The dark sedan, the tinted windows, the patrol cars that would be watching both properties for the coming nights. Helen listened with her hand still pressed flat against Mia's back, as though letting go even for a second might allow the whole night to happen all over again. It was only when Doyle finished, tipping his hat and stepping back out into the rain, that Helen finally turned to look at the man standing quietly near the office door, arms crossed, a sleeping child curled against his shoulder where he had picked her up off the couch without waking her. "You're Daniel," Helen said. "Yes, ma'am. You didn't have to do any of this, the tire, the phone call, staying up half the night with a stranger's child." Daniel shifted slightly under the weight of the sleeping girl in his arms, and offered the kind of shrug that came from a man who had never once thought of his actions as anything worth thanking. "Didn't feel like a choice," he said. "Felt like the only thing to do." Helen looked at him for a long moment, this man in a stained jacket with grease still under his fingernails, standing in a cluttered little office at 1 a.m, holding his daughter, and asking nothing in return, and something in her chest shifted, in a way she did not have a name for yet. "I don't know how to repay this," she said. "You don't need to repay it." Daniel's voice was even, unbothered, the voice of a man who had said this same sentence more than once tonight already. "Just get her somewhere safe, that's all I was trying to do." Helen nodded, throat too tight to answer properly, and turned back to her daughter, who had not let go of her arm since the moment they touched. Outside, the rain had finally begun to ease, the storm pulling itself apart somewhere over the hills, leaving behind only the steady drip of water from the shop's gutters and the distant hum of a patrol car idling at the edge of the lot. Neither of them knew yet that the storm outside had been the easy part. Morning came gray and quiet, the kind of soft light that follows a hard rain, and Helen woke on a narrow cot in the back room of Daniel's shop, still wearing yesterday's blazer, her phone buzzing uselessly on the floor beside her with messages from Grace that she had no intention of answering yet. Mia was already awake, sitting at the small kitchen table in the apartment above the shop, where Daniel had insisted they stay rather than drive back to a house Mia clearly did not want to return to. Lily sat across from her, swinging her feet under the table, narrating an elaborate story about her one-eared rabbit's secret life as a spy, and for the first time in longer than Helen could remember, she watched her daughter laugh, really laugh, at something that had nothing to do with performance or politeness. "She's good with kids," Daniel said quietly, setting 2 mugs of coffee on the counter beside Helen. "Wasn't expecting that. Mia, I mean." "She used to want to be a teacher," Helen said. Before what?" Helen did not answer right away. She wrapped both hands around the warm mug and watched her daughter through the doorway, the easy way Mia leaned toward Lily's story, fully present in a way she had not been in months. "Before Victor decided what she should want instead," Helen said finally. "He has opinions about everything, what she studies, who she spends time with, what kind of person she should become to be useful to this family's image. I told myself I was protecting both of us by keeping the peace. I think I was just making it easier for him." Daniel did not respond immediately. He had the look of a man choosing his words the way he chose tools, careful not to use the wrong one on a job that mattered. "Not my business how you run your family," he said, "but that girl drove into a storm rather than spend another night in that house. That's not nothing." The words landed harder than Helen expected, and she set the mug down before her hands could betray how much they had started to shake. "I know," she said quietly. "I've known for a while. I just didn't want to know it loud enough to do anything about it." It was nearly noon when the black sedan pulled into the lot. Mia saw it first, through the front window of the shop, and went rigid in a way that made Daniel look up from the engine he had been working on, hands stilling on a wrench. "That's the car," she said. "That's the one that followed me." The vehicle stopped at an angle that blocked the lot's only easy exit, and the driver's door opened before the engine had fully cut. Victor Sloan stepped out into the gravel lot, dressed in the kind of tailored coat that did not belong anywhere near a working garage, his expression arranged into the calm, reasonable face he wore whenever he wanted to convince a room he was the only sensible person in it. "Mia," he called, voice pitched warm and patient, the voice of a concerned parent, rather than a man who had just been reported to local police. "I've been worried sick. Get your things. We're going home." Helen stepped out from the office before Mia could move, placing herself between her daughter and the man crossing the lot. "You're not taking her anywhere," Helen said. Victor's eyes flicked to her, something cold passing behind the warmth for just a moment, before the pleasant mask slid back into place. "Helen, I should have known you'd make a scene out of a teenager's tantrum. She left the house in the middle of a storm without telling anyone. I had every right to be concerned. You had a car follow her on a dark road and box her in until she had to hide in the woods to lose it." Helen's voice had dropped into the register she used in boardrooms, flat and dangerous, and entirely without warmth. That's not concern, that's intimidation. That's a misunderstanding. Victor's smile thinned at the edges. I sent someone to make sure she got home safely. If she felt threatened, that's unfortunate, but it's hardly the same as... Save it for someone who hasn't read your contracts, Helen said. I know exactly how careful you are with language. You've never once used a word by accident in your life. Daniel had stepped out of the bay by now, wrench still loose in one hand, not raised, not threatening, simply present. A quiet wall of a man standing a few feet from where Mia had backed herself against the office doorframe. Victor's gaze swept over him, dismissive, the look of a man cataloging something beneath his notice. And who exactly is this? Victor asked. The mechanic who's decided he's entitled to an opinion about my family? Name's Daniel, Daniel said, voice perfectly even. And I'm the one your stepdaughter called when she had nowhere else to go. Make of that whatever you want. For a moment, something genuinely dangerous flickered across Victor's face, gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced again by that smooth, practiced calm. Mia, he said, ignoring Daniel entirely, focusing instead on the girl half hidden behind her mother. Sweetheart, I know you're upset, but this isn't the way to handle a disagreement. Come home. We'll talk this through like a family. I don't want to go home, Mia said, and though her voice shook, it did not waver. I haven't wanted to go home in a long time. Victor's jaw tightened, the first real crack in his composure. You're 16. You don't get to make that decision unilaterally. She doesn't have to, Helen said, because I'm making it for her. She's staying with me, tonight, and for as long as it takes to sort this out properly, through lawyers, not through you showing up at a stranger's place of business and making demands. Careful, Helen. Victor's voice dropped lower now, the warmth gone entirely, replaced by something flat and precise that made even Daniel's posture shift slightly, a small readiness in his stance. You know what happens to companies when their leadership becomes a subject of tabloid speculation? A messy custody dispute, a public scene at some roadside garage. That's not the kind of headline your board wants attached to the Lowry acquisition. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Victor adjusted the cuff of his coat, unbothered, almost bored. I have very good lawyers, Helen, better than the ones currently drafting your press releases. Think very carefully before you decide to turn this into a war you can't win quietly. The gravel crunched as a patrol car turned into the lot. Lights off but unmistakable, Officer Doyle behind the wheel, having apparently decided that a morning drive-by past the shop was worth the detour given the previous night's report. Victor's eyes flicked toward the approaching vehicle, and something in his calculation visibly shifted. This conversation isn't finished, he said, stepping back toward his car. But it doesn't need an audience. It already has one, Helen said. And it's going to have more before this is done, if that's the road you want to take. Victor said nothing further. He got into his car, reversed it with unhurried precision, and pulled out of the lot at a speed that suggested a man who never let anyone see him rushed, even when he very clearly was. Doyle climbed out of his patrol car as the dark sedan disappeared down the road, glancing between Helen, Mia, and Daniel with the expression of someone who had walked into the middle of something significant. Everything all right here? It will be, Helen said, though her hands had not stopped shaking since Victor first stepped out of his car. I need to speak with a lawyer, today. Someone who handles custody and protective orders, not corporate contracts. I can give you a name, Doyle said. Diane Pruitt, works out of the county seat. Good at this exact kind of thing. Helen nodded, already reaching for her phone, the same phone that 12 hours earlier had been buried under 6 hours of ignored notifications. Mia stood close beside her, arms wrapped around herself, watching the empty road where Victor's car had vanished. He's not going to just let this go, Mia said quietly. You know that. He never lets anything go. Neither will I, Helen said, and for the first time since arriving at that small shop on Route 9, she sounded entirely certain of something. Not this time. Daniel set the wrench down on the workbench behind him, the metallic clink loud in the sudden quiet, and looked between mother and daughter with an expression that was careful not to overstep into a fight that was not his. Whatever you need, he said. The shop's not going anywhere. Lily's used to having extra people around. So am I lately. Helen looked at him, this man who kept offering the same quiet, unasked-for steadiness with no apparent expectation of anything in return. and felt something unfamiliar settle into place behind her ribs, something that had nothing to do with the storm of the night before, and everything to do with how rarely anyone in her life simply stood still and stayed. "Thank you," she said again, and this time the words felt less like gratitude and more like the beginning of something she did not yet have a name for. She did not know, standing in that gravel lot with the morning sun finally breaking through the clouds, that Victor's threats were not empty posturing, and that within the week he would make good on every one of them, with lawyers, with reporters, and with a custody filing designed to take Mia away from her entirely. Diane Pruitt's office sat above a bakery in the county seat, a small space that smelled permanently of cinnamon despite the stacks of legal files crowding every surface. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a habit of tapping her pen against the desk whenever she was thinking through a problem, and she listened to Helen's account of the previous night, without interrupting once, only writing, the pen tapping faster as the story went on. "Let me understand the full picture," Diane said, setting the pen down at last. "Your husband had someone follow a minor on a public road, late at night, during a storm, to the point where she felt the need to hide her vehicle to lose them." "Yes, and he's framing this as a parent's reasonable concern for a runaway teenager. That's the language he used. Tantrum. Runaway. He's very careful with words." Diane's expression hardened slightly. "Careful people usually leave a trail anyway, because they think their care makes them untouchable. I want everything. Texts, emails, any record of prior incidents you mentioned, the car at her school. Officer Doyle's report from last night is a start, but it's not enough on its own. We need a pattern, not an isolated event." Mia, sitting quietly in the corner chair with her knees pulled up to her chest, spoke for the first time since they had arrived. "There's more than just last night," she said. "I never told you because I thought you'd just tell me I was being dramatic. He goes through my phone sometimes. He's had the housekeeper report what time I leave and come back. There was a tracker on my car for a while. I found it under the seat, but I never said anything because I didn't think anyone would believe me over him." Helen's face went very still, the particular stillness of someone absorbing a wound too large to react to all at once. "You should have told me," she said softly. "You were never there to tell," Mia said, not cruelly, just honestly, and the honesty cut deeper than cruelty would have. "You were always in a meeting, or on a flight, or behind Grace telling me you'd call back. I didn't think you had room for one more problem." The silence that followed sat heavy in the small office, broken only by the muffled sound of the bakery downstairs, and Diane's pen, still now, resting against the legal pad. "I have room," Helen said finally, voice rough in a way it almost never was. "I should have made room a long time ago. I'm making it now." Diane gave them a moment before continuing, her tone gentler now but no less precise. "A tracker on a minor's vehicle, monitored communications, surveillance near a school, that's not concern, that's a pattern of control. Combined with last night's incident, we have grounds to file for an emergency protective order, and to begin the process of formally removing Victor's parental claim, given he's not Mia's biological father, and the marriage itself may not survive what's coming." "And if he fights it?" Helen asked. "He will. He has resources. He's already threatened the press." "Then we fight back with documentation instead of headlines," Diane said. "Judges care far less about tabloid noise than they do about sworn statements and a clear pattern of behavior. Your job, both of you, is to keep a record of everything from this point forward. Every call, every message, every appearance, no matter how small it seems." Helen nodded, already pulling out her phone to forward whatever digital trail existed, the same phone that 2 days earlier had been reserved almost entirely for board memos and acquisition terms. By the time they left Diane's office, the afternoon had turned soft and golden, the kind of light that made the whole ugly morning at the shop feel like something from a different season entirely. Helen drove them back toward Route 9 out of habit more than necessity, neither of them quite ready to discuss where they would actually sleep that night, the question of home suddenly far more complicated than 4 walls and a roof. Daniel was closing up the last bay when they pulled in, Lily perched on an overturned bucket nearby, carefully lining up a row of mismatched bolts by size, with the focused seriousness only a small child could bring to a meaningless task. "How'd it go?" Daniel asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "Complicated," Helen said. "Necessary. Sounds about right for lawyers." Daniel glanced between them, reading something in their faces that he did not ask about directly. "You're welcome to stay again tonight." Apartment's small, but the couch pulls out, and Lily's already decided Mia's basically her new favorite person, so I doubt either of them will object. Mia managed a small, tired smile, the first one Helen had seen since the lawyer's office. I don't mind. Honestly, it's the first place that's felt quiet in a long time. Not empty quiet, just quiet. Helen watched her daughter cross the lot to help Lily sort the bolts, watched the easy, unforced way the two of them fell into conversation, and felt the strange, unfamiliar ache of gratitude toward a man she had known for less than 24 hours. "You keep doing this," she said to Daniel, once the girls were out of earshot. "Opening your home to strangers like it costs you nothing." "It costs something," Daniel admitted. "Time, mostly. Sleep, some nights. But not as much as it would cost me to turn away a kid who needed somewhere safe to land. I learned that lesson the hard way, after Claire died. Costs a lot more to live with the regret of not helping than it does to just help." Helen looked at him for a long moment, this quiet, unhurried man who measured his worth in actions rather than words, and thought about every meeting she had sat through that week, every number she had defended, every hour spent protecting a company's value, while the most valuable thing in her life had been quietly drowning in a house 200 miles away. "I don't know how to be the kind of person who just helps without calculating the cost first," she admitted. "I've spent 20 years training that instinct out of myself." "Don't think it's something you train out," Daniel said. "Think it's something that gets buried under enough meetings and enough people telling you it's a weakness. Doesn't mean it's gone, just means it's waiting." The evening settled in slow and golden, crickets starting up somewhere beyond the tree line, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Helen Carter did not check her phone once for the entire span of dinner, content instead to watch her daughter laugh at something Lily said. Untroubled, unwatched, finally and completely safe. It would not last. They both knew it would not last. But for one evening it was enough. The story broke 6 days later, not through any official filing, but through a gossip column that ran under the headline, "Carter Heiress Hides Out with Mechanic After Family Meltdown," accompanied by a grainy photograph taken from the road outside the shop, Helen's car visible in the lot, Daniel's chipped blue sign in the background. Grace forwarded it to Helen at 6 in the morning with a single line attached. "This is not good, but it's not the worst thing that could have run." Helen read the article twice, jaw tight, before calling Diane Pruitt directly. "He leaked this," Helen said, no greeting, straight into the point. "I know he did. This is exactly the narrative he wants. Unstable mother, scandal, a daughter running wild while the business suffers. I agree it has his fingerprints on it," Diane said, "but it's not entirely bad news for us. It also confirms publicly that you and Mia have been staying somewhere together, voluntarily, away from his household. That's not nothing in front of a judge." "It's going to be everything in front of my board," Helen said. "The Lowry acquisition is hanging on confidence in my leadership. A scandal like this, even an unfair one, gives them an excuse to walk." "Then let them walk," Diane said, with the flat practicality of someone who had spent decades watching wealthy people choose companies over children. "Helen, I've handled a lot of custody cases. The ones that go badly are almost always the ones where a parent tries to protect two things at once and ends up failing both. You can't half-fight this." Helen closed her eyes, phone pressed hard against her ear, the morning light cutting harsh across the small apartment kitchen where Mia sat at the table, very still, very aware that the conversation was about her. "I'm not going to half-fight it," Helen said. "Tell me what you need." What Diane needed, over the following days, turned out to be exhausting in ways Helen had not anticipated. Sworn statements from Officer Doyle, a formal request for the school's security footage, to confirm the presence of the black sedan parked outside on the days Mia had described, a subpoena for phone records, an uncomfortable process that required Helen to authorize access to her own daughter's private messages, something that made Mia go quiet and withdrawn for an entire afternoon, the betrayal of even justified surveillance landing somewhere tender. And, most unexpectedly, a request for Daniel to provide a written statement describing the night Mia first arrived at his shop. "I don't love the idea of being part of a court case," Daniel admitted, when Diane called to ask. He stood in the bay with the phone wedged against his shoulder, hands still busy with a transmission he had been rebuilding for 3 days. "Not because I'm not willing to say what happened, because the second my name's attached to something this public, people start looking at my shop different, looking at Lily different. We've had enough strangers slow down and stare since that article ran. I understand the concern, Diane said, but your statement, an independent witness with no prior connection to either parent, no financial stake, nothing to gain, that's exactly the kind of testimony that cuts through a case like this. Victor's lawyers are going to paint you as some kind of opportunist if they can. The more plainly you tell the truth, the harder that becomes. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the soft clink of a wrench being set down on the workbench. Lily already asks me most nights why there's a man taking pictures of our parking lot, he said finally. I'll write the statement, not because I want the attention, because that girl sat in my office shaking, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't see what I saw just because it's inconvenient. It was Tony Russo, Daniel's longtime friend, and the shop's second mechanic, who found the detail that changed everything. Tony had been quietly reviewing the shop's old security camera, a battered unit mounted above the second bay that mostly caught nothing more interesting than raccoons getting into the trash, when he noticed something on the footage from the storm night, hours before Mia had ever pulled into the lot. "Daniel, you need to see this," Tony said, calling him over to the small monitor in the back office. The grainy black and white footage paused on a timestamp from earlier that evening. The footage showed the gravel lot outside, mostly empty, until a figure appeared near the edge of the frame, crouched beside a parked car that, judging by the angle and the timestamp, had to belong to a customer who had dropped a vehicle off earlier that day for an unrelated repair. A car that, as it happened, Mia had borrowed from a family friend, after hers was deemed unsafe for the long drive she'd been planning that night. A detail buried in the lawyer's earlier notes that none of them had thought significant until now. The man on the footage worked quickly, kneeling by the rear tire for less than a minute before standing and walking briskly out of frame, never once looking up toward the camera. "That's not a flat from road wear," Tony said quietly. "That's somebody letting air out, or worse, working a valve loose enough to fail under highway speed but not fail right away. That's deliberate." Daniel stared at the frozen image for a long moment, something cold settling into his chest. "You're telling me somebody sabotaged that tire on purpose," he said, "before she even left the house." "I'm telling you the footage shows exactly that," Tony said, "and it's time-stamped 4 hours before she ever drove past us. Whoever did it knew that car, knew the route, and didn't care whether a blowout at speed put her in a ditch." Daniel sat with that for a long moment, hands flat on the desk, the image of Mia standing in the rain over a shredded tire, taking on a different, far more frightening shape in his mind. "We need to send this to Diane," he said, "tonight." Diane's reaction, when she viewed the footage the following morning, was the closest Helen had ever seen the calm, unflappable lawyer come to genuine alarm. "This changes the entire shape of the case," Diane said, voice tight. "We're no longer talking about surveillance and control. We're talking about someone deliberately tampering with a vehicle in a way that could have caused serious injury, or worse. This isn't just a custody matter anymore. This is something the district attorney needs to see." Helen sat very still, the weight of the footage settling over her slowly, the realization that the storm, the blowout, the chase down a dark road, none of it had been chance at all. Someone had planned it. Someone had stood in her shop's parking lot, kneeling beside her daughter's borrowed car, and made a calculated decision that a 16-year-old's safety was an acceptable risk. Who, Helen said quietly, who would have access to do that? Who would even know which car she'd be driving? "That's the question," Diane said, "and it's one that points in a very specific direction, given how few people knew about the arrangement to borrow that vehicle." Mia, sitting across the room with her arms wrapped tight around her knees, spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Victor knew," she said. "He's the one who suggested I take that car instead of mine. Said mine needed an oil change first. I didn't think anything of it. He's always managing little details like that." The room went very quiet. "He set it up," Helen said slowly, the words tasting like something poisonous in her mouth. "He arranged for her to drive that specific car, and then he had someone disable the tire, knowing she'd be on that road, in that storm. We don't have proof yet that connects him directly to the man in the footage," Diane said carefully, "but we have enough now to bring in the district attorney's office, and enough to request a forensic identification of whoever appears on that camera. If there's a connection to Victor, financial, employment, anything, it will surface." Daniel, standing near the doorway with Lily's small hand wrapped around two of his fingers, looked at Mia with an expression that had gone past anger into something quieter and far more dangerous, the particular stillness of a man who had spent his whole life being careful with his strength and was now seriously considering what it might be for. He didn't just want to control her, Daniel said. He was willing to risk her life to keep that control. That's not a man who backs down from a custody hearing because somebody asks him politely. No, Diane agreed. Which is exactly why we're not asking politely anymore. We're filing for emergency protective custody, today, on the strength of this footage, and we're requesting the court issue a restraining order, effective immediately. Victor Sloan is about to find out that money and lawyers don't make evidence disappear. The board meeting Helen had been avoiding for 9 days finally caught up with her the following morning, called not by her own office but by 3 members of the board who had grown impatient with cancellations and vague excuses about a family emergency. She took the call from the shop's back office, Tony Russo's old desk chair creaking beneath her, the smell of brake fluid drifting in from the bay outside. "We need clarity, Helen," one of the older board members said, his voice carrying the particular irritation of a man unused to being kept waiting. "The Lowry deal is slipping through our fingers while you're off dealing with whatever this situation is. The press coverage alone has cost us credibility with 3 other potential partners." "The situation," Helen said, her voice perfectly level despite the heat rising in her chest, "is that my 16-year-old daughter was nearly killed by a sabotage tire, arranged by her own stepfather, and I have spent the last 9 days making sure the people responsible are held accountable, instead of making sure your quarterly numbers stay tidy." A pause stretched across the line, uncomfortable and long. "I'm not asking your permission," Helen continued. "I'm informing you that I will be present for board matters as my daughter's safety allows, starting now and continuing for as long as it takes. If that arrangement doesn't suit the board, I trust you all remember whose name is on the building and whose decisions built the company you're currently worried about losing." She ended the call without waiting for a response, set the phone face down on the desk, and sat for a long moment in the quiet, half expecting the familiar flood of anxiety that usually followed any moment of friction with her board. It did not come. What came instead was something closer to relief. Daniel found her there a few minutes later, leaning in the doorway with a mug of coffee in each hand, offering one without comment. "Bad call?" "Honest one," Helen said, accepting the mug, which lately feels like the same thing. That evening, while Helen sat at Diane's office reviewing the language of the emergency filing, line by line, Daniel found Mia sitting alone on the tailgate of his truck, knees pulled up, watching the sun drop low behind the tree line. "You all right?" he asked, settling onto the tailgate beside her, leaving a careful, respectful distance between them. "I keep thinking about the footage," Mia said. "That man kneeling by the tire. I keep imagining what would have happened if the blowout came at highway speed, instead of on that backstretch. I could have died and never even known why." Daniel did not offer easy reassurance, did not tell her not to think about it, the way so many adults in her life had trained her to expect. He simply sat with the weight of what she had said for a moment, letting it exist in the open air between them. "You're allowed to be angry about that," he said finally. "Angrier than you've let yourself be, probably. Anger's not the enemy here. It's just energy that hasn't found its shape yet. What do you do with it? The anger? Used to come out here and rebuild engines that didn't need rebuilding," Daniel admitted. "After Claire died, took apart things that weren't broken just so I'd have something to put back together. Eventually I figured out the anger wasn't actually about the engines." Mia was quiet for a moment, watching the last light fade from gold to gray over the trees. "Thank you," she said, "for not telling me I should just be grateful it wasn't worse. Everybody keeps saying that, like I'm supposed to feel lucky instead of angry." "You can feel both," Daniel said. "Most people who've been through something like this do." Outside, the afternoon had turned overcast again, clouds gathering low over the hills the same way they had the night the storm first broke, and Helen found herself thinking, with a clarity that felt almost violent, that whatever Victor believed about his own untouchability, he had badly misjudged exactly how far she was willing to go now that her daughter's life had stopped being an abstract concern and become something concrete enough to nearly lose. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday, in a courtroom far smaller and plainer than Helen had expected, wood paneling worn soft at the edges from decades of difficult mornings just like this one. Victor arrived with 2 lawyers flanking him, Gerald Lowry among them, his presence a small, deliberate cruelty, The same man Helen had been negotiating an acquisition with, now standing on the opposite side of a fight for her daughter. Judge Eleanor Marsh presided with the unhurried patience of someone who had heard every kind of family fall apart in this room, and had long ago stopped being surprised by any of it. She reviewed the filings in silence for several long minutes before looking up over the rim of her glasses. "I've reviewed the security footage submitted by counsel for the petitioner," Judge Marsh said. "I've also reviewed the forensic report, identifying the individual in that footage as a man named Curtis Renfro, currently employed by a private security firm under contract with Sloan Holdings. Mr. Sloan, I'll give you the opportunity to address this directly. Did you have any knowledge of, or involvement in, the tampering of a vehicle your stepdaughter was scheduled to drive on the night in question?" Victor rose slowly, buttoning his jacket, his composure remarkable even now, though Helen could see the faint tightness at his jaw that betrayed the effort it cost him. "Your Honor, I have no knowledge of any tampering," Victor said. "If an employee of a contracted security firm acted independently and inappropriately, that is a matter between that individual and his employer, not a reflection of my intentions toward my stepdaughter, whose safety has always been my primary concern." "Convenient," Diane said, rising before the judge could respond. "Your Honor, phone records obtained through subpoena show 3 calls between Mr. Sloan's personal cell phone and Curtis Renfro's number on the day in question, the last of which occurred approximately 90 minutes before the footage shows Mr. Renfro at the defendant's shop. We've submitted the full call log as Exhibit 12. A ripple moved through the small courtroom, Victor's lawyer leaning in to murmur something urgent, Victor's own expression flickering, just for a moment, into something that was no longer entirely composed. "Those calls could relate to any number of routine matters," Victor's lawyer said, rising. "Security arrangements are discussed regularly, given Mr. Sloan's public profile." "They could," Judge Marsh said evenly, "which is why this court will be referring the matter to the district attorney's office for full criminal investigation, separate from these proceedings, since tampering with a vehicle in a manner that endangers a minor is well outside the scope of a family custody matter. As for the custody question before us today, I've heard more than sufficient evidence of a pattern of surveillance, control, and now potential endangerment to grant an emergency protective order effective immediately, barring Mr. Sloan from contact with Mia Carter, pending a full hearing in 60 days. Victor's composure finally cracked, a tight, furious stillness replacing the practiced calm of moments before. "This is absurd," he said, voice low and hard. "An employee's overreach is being weaponized into an attack on my entire character." "Mr. Sloan," Judge Marsh said, not unkindly but with absolute finality, "you may make that argument in 60 days, with full representation, before this same court. Today, I am protecting a 16-year-old girl who has, by every account in this room, been living in fear inside her own home. That takes precedence over your reputation." The gavel came down, quiet and final, and something in Helen's chest, something that had been clenched tight for 9 days straight, finally let go. Mia did not cry in the courtroom. She waited until they were outside, standing on the worn stone steps under a sky finally clearing of clouds, before the sound came out of her all at once, not the quiet hidden crying of the storm night, but something looser, something that sounded almost like relief learning how to breathe again. Helen held her there on the steps for a long time, neither of them speaking, while Diane finished a quiet conversation with the district attorney's office behind them, and Daniel stood a respectful distance away, Lily's hand in his, giving them the space to feel something that had been a very long time coming. It was not over. Victor would fight the criminal investigation. He would fight the full hearing in 60 days. Men like him did not simply walk away from a battle because a single morning had not gone their way. But for the first time since the night of the storm, Mia stood in open air, unwatched, unfollowed, and entirely, finally, safe. 60 days passed slower than Helen expected, and faster than she was ready for. She did not return to the coastal flight that had once been scheduled for the morning after the storm. She did not reconvene the acquisition meeting either, not for nearly 3 weeks, a decision that cost Carter Holdings a portion of the deal's original terms, and cost Helen, by her own estimate, several $1 million in lost leverage. She signed the papers anyway, in a smaller, less favorable shape than the one she had fought so hard for that first night, and felt, strangely, almost nothing about the loss at all. Grace had asked her once, gently, whether she regretted letting the original terms slip. "No," Helen had said, and meant it completely. I spent 11 years thinking the version of myself who never blinked first was the only version worth being. Turns out she wasn't very good at the part of the job that actually mattered. The criminal investigation into Curtis Renfro moved with the slow, grinding pace. Such things always seem to move, but it moved in the right direction. Renfro, facing the weight of phone records and footage that left little room for denial, eventually cooperated in exchange for a reduced charge, confirming under sworn statement that he had been instructed, directly, by Victor Sloan, to disable the vehicle in a manner designed to look accidental. Victor's lawyers fought hard in the days that followed, painting Renfro as a rogue employee acting beyond any sanctioned order, but the recorded calls, the timing, the specific knowledge of which car Mia would be driving, none of it left enough ambiguity for any reasonable person to believe the version of events Victor's team kept trying to sell. The full custody hearing, when it finally arrived, lasted less than 2 hours. Judge Marsh terminated Victor's parental rights entirely, citing the established pattern of surveillance, control, and the deliberate endangerment that had nearly cost Mia her life on a dark, rain-soaked road. The criminal case against Victor himself, conspiracy to tamper with a vehicle and reckless endangerment of a minor, was still working its way through the courts, but the man who had once stood in a gravel parking lot threatening Helen with headlines now found himself far more concerned with the headlines his own arraignment was generating. Mia did not attend that final hearing. She had asked, quietly, if it would be all right to stay behind instead, and Helen, who had spent 16 years believing presence meant showing up to every single difficult thing in person, found herself saying yes without hesitation, understanding for the first time that sometimes protecting someone meant letting them choose their own distance from the thing that had hurt them. She had stayed at the shop that day instead, helping Tony Russo organize a back room full of invoices that had not been properly filed since sometime the previous winter, while Lily sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, narrating an entirely new chapter in the ongoing adventures of her one-eared rabbit. "You're better at filing than you let on," Tony said, watching Mia sort through a stack of receipts with practiced efficiency. "I used to help my grandmother with her bookkeeping, before she passed," Mia said. "It's kind of nice. Numbers don't lie to you. They don't have opinions about who you should be." Tony laughed, a short, warm sound. "Daniel could use somebody around here who actually likes paperwork. Lord knows it's not me." It became, without anyone quite deciding it on purpose, a regular thing. Mia came by most weekday afternoons after school, sorting invoices, answering the phone when both mechanics had their hands too greasy to pick it up, slowly becoming as familiar a fixture in the shop as the chipped blue sign out front. Lily had appointed herself Mia's permanent shadow, the two of them inseparable in the particular intense way that an 8-year-old and a 16-year-old sometimes became when neither one had quite enough family around to spare. On Diane's recommendation, Mia began seeing a counselor twice a month, a quiet, unhurried woman named Carol Whitfield, who worked out of a small office above the same bakery as the lawyers, as though the whole county had decided to handle its hardest conversations within walking distance of fresh bread. Mia resisted the idea at first, certain it would feel like one more adult deciding what she needed without asking, but Carol turned out to be nothing like that, content mostly to listen, occasionally asking a question precise enough to crack something open that Mia had not realized was still closed. "Do you still think about the tire?" Carol asked, during one of their early sessions. "Less than I used to," Mia admitted. "I used to replay it every night before I fell asleep, the sound it made when it blew. Now mostly I think about after. The shop, Daniel handing me a card with wet edges. That part doesn't scare me. That part feels like the actual story now, not the part before it." "That's a significant shift," Carol said. "It means the fear isn't the loudest voice anymore." Helen attended a handful of those sessions too, at Carol's suggestion, sitting quietly while mother and daughter worked through months of silence that had built up long before any storm or any stranger's garage entered the picture. It was uncomfortable, more than once, hearing exactly how invisible she had made herself in the years she had told herself she was simply working hard for both of them. But she stayed in the room anyway, every difficult session, because Daniel had once told her that showing up uncomfortable was still showing up, and she had decided, somewhere in the month since the storm, to actually believe him. The town itself, small as it was, had a way of folding people into its rhythms without much ceremony. By the time autumn arrived, Helen had become a familiar enough face at the diner 2 doors down from Diane's office, the waitress no longer needing to ask how she took her coffee. Earl Watkins, an elderly customer of Daniel's who had been getting quiet discounts on parts for years longer than he probably realized, took to calling Helen the city lady who finally figured out what mattered, a nickname delivered with such plain, unbothered affection that Helen found herself looking forward to his visits more than she ever expected to. Helen found reasons to be there too, more often than her schedule strictly allowed, though she stopped pretending, somewhere around the 3rd week, that the reasons had much to do with logistics at all. "You know," Daniel said one evening, the two of them sitting on the tailgate of his truck while the girls chased fireflies across the lot in the last of the summer light. "When you first showed up here, I figured you for the kind of person who'd disappear the second the lawyers finished their work. Wire me a check, maybe, say a polite thank you, and go back to whatever life you were living before a flat tire interrupted it. I considered it," Helen admitted, "for about an hour. Then I remembered what that life actually looked like up close. Meetings that ran until midnight. A daughter who'd stopped believing I'd answer the phone. I'm not in a hurry to go back to being that person." "What are you in a hurry for, then?" Helen watched the fireflies for a moment, the easy, unhurried quiet of the evening settling over her in a way that still felt slightly foreign, like a language she was only beginning to learn fluently. "Honestly, nothing," she said. "For the first time in longer than I can remember, I'm not in a hurry for anything at all." Daniel smiled at that, a small, genuine thing that reached all the way up into his eyes, and reached over to take her hand, not with any particular urgency, just a quiet, steady gesture, the same way he did most things. "That's a good place to land," he said. The criminal trial against Victor Sloan concluded the following spring, ending in a conviction on charges of conspiracy and reckless endangerment, a sentence that would keep him well away from any courtroom, boardroom, or gravel parking lot for a long time to come. Helen read the verdict from her phone while sitting at the small kitchen table above the shop, Mia beside her, both of them quiet for a long moment, before Mia finally spoke. "I keep waiting to feel something bigger," Mia said. "Like it should feel like winning. Mostly it just feels like the weight finally came off." "That's allowed to be enough," Helen said. "It doesn't have to feel like winning. It just has to feel like safe." Carter Holdings had rebuilt itself in the months since the storm, slower than before, more deliberate, with Helen delegating in ways she had once believed only weakness allowed. She kept her evenings now, most of them, and her weekends almost entirely, a habit that had cost the company exactly as much as everyone had warned her it would, and had given her back something no acquisition, no matter how favorable the terms, could ever have purchased. Mia applied to 3 colleges that winter, none of them the prestigious, image-conscious schools Victor had once insisted were the only acceptable options, but smaller programs with strong education departments, the kind of schools she had once believed she was not allowed to want. She filled out the applications at the kitchen table above the shop, Lily perched beside her pretending to fill out her own imaginary application to what she called Dinosaur University, and Helen, reading over the essay drafts in the evenings, found herself struck again and again by how clearly her daughter's own voice came through, free now of the careful, managed phrasing Victor had once required of every public sentence she wrote. "You don't have to pick the one closest to here," Helen told her one evening, noticing the way Mia kept circling back to a small college only 40 minutes from the shop. "I want you choosing because it's right for you, not because you're worried about leaving us behind." "I know," Mia said. "I looked at all of them. This one's just genuinely the best fit. The fact that it's close is a bonus, not the reason." She paused, fidgeting with the edge of the application packet. "Is that okay? That I want to stay close? I keep thinking I should want to run as far away as possible, prove I can build a whole life with no connection to any of this, but I don't want that. I like the life we're building right here." Helen reached across the table and covered her daughter's hand with her own. "It's more than okay," she said. "It's the most honest thing I've heard you say in years." Daniel, for his part, had quietly become something steadier than either of them had ever discussed out loud, a presence Helen no longer questioned, or measured against some old, exhausting standard of what a partner was supposed to provide. He never asked her to be smaller to fit into his life, never seemed threatened by the parts of her that still belonged to boardrooms and acquisitions, and in turn she had stopped expecting him to be anything other than exactly what he already was, a man who fixed what was broken, and never once made a show of doing it. It was Tony Russo, of all people, who finally said the thing neither Daniel nor Helen seemed in any hurry to say themselves, catching Daniel alone in the back office one evening while Helen and the girls loaded grocery bags into the truck outside. "You gonna marry that woman? Or are you two just going to keep pretending you're not already basically married?" Tony asked, not unkindly, wiping grease from his hands with the particular bluntness of a friend who had earned the right to ask. Daniel did not answer right away, watching through the office window as Helen laughed at something Lily said, head tipped back, completely unguarded in a way Daniel suspected very few people outside this gravel lot ever got to see anymore. "Working on it," he said finally. "Some things you don't rush. Figure this is one of them." "Figured you'd say something like that," Tony said, grinning. "You rebuilt that transmission for old Earl over 6 weeks because you said rushing a job just means doing it twice. I guess you apply the same philosophy to your love life." "Difference is," Daniel said, "I'm not worried about doing this one twice. Just want to make sure I do it right the first time." On a warm evening nearly a year after the storm that had first brought them together, Helen stood in the doorway of Hartley Auto Repair, watching Daniel teach Mia how to properly torque a lug nut, while Lily supervised with the unwavering authority of someone who considered herself the shop's senior expert, despite being barely 9 years old. "You're doing it wrong," Lily announced solemnly. "You have to go in a star pattern, not in a circle. Daddy taught me that." "My apologies," Mia said, laughing, adjusting her grip on the wrench with exaggerated seriousness. "Please, teach me your ways." Daniel caught Helen's eye across the bay and smiled, the easy, unhurried smile she had come to know so well over the past year, the smile of a man who had built an entire life out of small, steady kindnesses, and had somehow, without ever meaning to, built a family out of the wreckage left behind by someone else's cruelty. Helen thought, standing there in the doorway with the smell of motor oil and summer evening air settling around her, about the woman she had been the night her daughter's first voicemail arrived, too buried in a boardroom to even hear her own child crying out for help. She thought about how far that woman had traveled to end up here, in a gravel parking lot outside a small-town garage, no longer measuring her worth in acquisitions or quarterly earnings, but in fireflies caught and released, in lug nuts tightened in careful star patterns, in the steady, unremarkable miracle of simply being present. Somewhere behind her, a phone buzzed in her bag, a work message she would answer eventually, but not tonight. Tonight, she crossed the gravel lot toward the sound of her daughter's laughter, toward a girl who had taught her how to be small and silly, and entirely without an agenda, toward a man who had taught her that the most valuable thing a person could offer another human being was simply showing up, without being asked, without expecting anything in return. She reached the bay just as Mia finally got the lug nut seated to Lily's exacting satisfaction, the two of them breaking into laughter at some private joke Helen had not caught the start of, and Daniel held out his hand without a word, the same easy, unhurried gesture he had offered 100 evenings before, and Helen took it, because there was nowhere else in the world she would rather be standing. Somewhere on a back road 2 hours from here, a young driver would someday hit a pothole, or a nail, or simply bad luck, and pull onto a gravel shoulder under a darkening sky, frightened and alone. Helen liked to think, on quiet evenings like this one, that whoever they were, they would be lucky enough to find a chipped blue sign glowing somewhere nearby, and a man inside who would not ask a single question before reaching for his jack. That was the kind of luck that did not show up in any boardroom, in any acquisition, in any number Helen had once believed mattered more than anything else in the world. It was the only kind of luck that had ever actually saved her family. The storm that had once seemed like the worst night of their lives had turned out, in the end, to be the night that finally led them home.